close, boring book with no regrets, leave that movie, walk away from meaningless and shallow conversations. Life is too precious to spend it, waste it on all of that. So what about education? It feels like nowadays, Department of Education is over-delivering only in one thing, and that would be loan size. What about our bright, great future? We all have questions, rightfully so. That's why this time I sat down together with the Professor Patrick J. Murphy from University of Alabama in Birmingham, trying to analyze all these questions. He is heart and brain behind the entrepreneurship program at the UAB, and they're trying to chase two major goals, and I like them a lot. Provide really important theoretical knowledge which can be transferred into practical wisdom. Please enjoy this conversation. I really hope that you will be able to find a lot of great ideas echoing and addressing your questions as they've addressed mine. The latest MBA related programs, I've heard that there is a decline, but I wanted to find the specific numbers. And the numbers I was able to find was 4.9% within the year 2023 for all the universities across all countries. And by all the universities, I mean Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, that you would never most probably imagine that this can happen, but here we are, 4.9% of decline, and this is the highest number within the last 5 years. And the majority of the problems highlighted by the possible, essentially, students were the fact that the program is way too theoretical and way too expensive at the same time.
The environment changes. Absolutely. Society changes, markets change, communities change. The values that define these entities, these sociological elements, they all change over time, but they tend to change a little bit slowly, and they tend to change in very complex ways. So I believe what you're describing and what we're seeing is a generational shift, every 25 years or so, and it's correlated with technology, and it's correlated with how people are able to share information and educate themselves informally, as it were. Their values change, but then that means what they want changes. Values means you think some things are good and some things are bad. So young people today, they are able to get a lot of information for more inexpensively than ever before. If they're interested in it, they can find information, or they can research certain topics. And then if they're not interested in a particular topic or a body of information or a social problem, they can ignore it. They have that freedom now. So that is different from past generations, because in past generations, the freedom to consume what information you wanted and ignore the information you wanted was less. And so given that it's higher, the whole system is more apt to change and evolve. But yet again, we're talking about complex change. So what I see right now, to make it as simple as possible in my mind, or as clear as possible, is a new generation of learners who are entering university, who are the first generation to have grown up with information technology that works really well, fast, cheap, reliable. And therefore, in growing up, even from a young age, they've been able to do what I just described. They could research things they wanted to research. They could ignore topics that they weren't interested in. And they could maybe discover topics they wouldn't otherwise discover if the system were less open. And so the result of that is a fierce sense of independence or identity, or a clear sense of who they are. And that sense is just one step away from a strong entrepreneurial mindset, because one of the entrepreneurial superpowers is not caring what other people think or not caring what society thinks. And the people who are robust to social pressure typically have a strong sense of who they are. They believe in who they are and what they think is important. So I think this new generation, known as Generation Z, has a very strong sense of independence. Now, it's different from the previous generation to them, the millennials, Gen Y, whom I taught for 20 years. And I have a lot of experience in that I can compare between the two, that I can use to compare the two generations. Um, but that's my position. So as a result of that, you take an institution like higher education today, which has not evolved much over the past 50 or 100 years. I mean, you do have online learning, which is new. It's there's a lot of things it can't do, but the core offering of this institution is people in rooms, often in rows or at tables, and then one individual speaking to them and sharing knowledge with them. And that's something that hasn't really changed for many, many years. And so that model, if students believe they can get information better, cheaper, faster, more relevant elsewhere, they're going to be attracted to that. And so to me, it creates a huge opportunity. It's not a bad thing at all for modern universities. In fact, it's a good thing because problems yield opportunities. All opportunities come from things that are broken or don't work as well as they ought to be working. And so the innovators and the entrepreneurial individuals in higher education who are taking risks, I believe, are going to own the day going forward for the next few decades. And it's not there's not much downside risk to taking a different approach to education because the students often tell you exactly what they want and how they want it. You have a market right there who will tell you what they like and what they don't like. And then if you design educational programs in relation to that, you can meet the market or meet the community, as it were. There is That's an ideological argument I just made. Most everybody working in a university today understands that. But when an institution, when an institutional field or a specific institution changes, it's not just ideological. This change is structural. So you have really smart people working in these institutions who understand what I just articulated, but they're not able to pivot and take advantage of it because of structural barriers and structural gaps. And so there's a restructuring through the agreements and the contracts and the norms and the departmental and school and college level structures. Those often need to be changed if you're going to pivot to, serve a market or a community in a new way. And when you have institutions that are this old, that structural inertia is large. It's immense. And so this is some of the reason why universities don't change very quickly. However, in my case, which you mentioned, we're in a fortunate position because I built my career in the city of Chicago. I was there for 20 years, and I was at another institution in the city of Chicago before I moved here to Birmingham, Alabama. But when I was recruited, they told me we want a bold, avant-garde, new kind of educational approach. And when I got here, there was not a proper entrepreneurship program here. And there were a lot of opportunities to build something from the ground up. So with the support of my school and my university and the leaders of the university, I've been able to make those moves. If I were embedded in another institution for a long time, it would be a different set of challenges. But now in this position I'm in, I have a lot of conversations with leaders of entrepreneurship programs at other universities, because if you have tenure in the university system, that's why you have it. It's to be disruptive and to do good things that are not normal in terms of what has been done before, and to take some risk. And folks need to use the institution of tenure, which is an important part of academia, to really shift the needle. or not even just shift the needle, but recalibrate the gauge. And so you're right, change is needed. My response to that is change is coming, and it doesn't come quickly. It's happening over time. So I'm optimistic about what higher education will be able to do to meet these needs that you articulated. And I'm a big believer in education. I believe that YouTube videos or workshops in a community, they cannot match a world-class education if it's done right. There's something about a world-class university education that is transformative for a learner, and we need to own that and embrace that. But we also need to take the need for change very seriously.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned a couple really interesting ideas, and for this moment being, I would like to talk with you about this idea that there are a lot of systematic like borders and silos already in the system. And in many cases, when we are talking about situations like that, there might be a need or even a push for some kind of a revolution, right? Rapid change, like rip the band-aid off. I'm not a big fan of these ideas, but I do understand the emotion behind of it. So what's your take on this topic? Evolution or revolution? And if any, how do you see that this change can happen, and it can happen across all the system? I mean, across all the universities and for all the students and all the like, I don't know, kids who are currently in the system, right? Because most probably, and that was yet another topic you mentioned, that we are building, you're revolutionizing or adding some new ideas for the Gen Z. But my son, who's 10 years old and shortly gonna be one of your students, he is from Alpha Gen, so called. So you're building, and by you I mean not you personally, but rather larger scope of professors and philosophers. Maybe yet another time, the like, you're preparing for the old wars, as they say, right? Because when my son will be at the university, there is quite a great chance that his requests and his needs and problems might be slightly different comparing to Gen Z.
I'm a big believer, Yaryna, in the power of culture and the culture of education in, at least in the West. There are philosophical, there are classical foundations to this. It is a little different from, we'll say, education in the East, the Orient East, um, not the West. Like Confucius versus Socrates, this kind of stuff.
Okay, because I was a little bit confused. Like, are you comparing the, I don't know, the current Japanese school approach or Chinese school approach to the Western world?
Both. No, no,
Okay.
no, 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 both. There's a
So,
culture
like, the
beneath.
whole system.
Yeah, there's a
Hmm.
cultural difference at the level of East and West in the world, and it comes from philosophical traditions. Confucius was a teacher. Um, Socrates was a teacher. The way Confucius taught was speaking, and students listened. The way Socrates taught was by asking questions, and the students responded. It's a basic ontological difference with regard to how knowledge is shared and teaching occurs. The growth of knowledge is a very social process. Both of those paradigmatic approaches involve sharing and a social mechanism, but the program is different. And so I'm a big believer in the importance of that, the power of culture. It These differences are reflected in our language. For instance, in in the Mandarin Chinese language, the word for question is the exact same word used for problem. The only difference is the context in which it's used. So, but in the West, if you're to say, I have a question, it means something different than I have a problem. The latter has a little bit more of a negative connotation, and you're less inclined to do it. But that's exactly what you're doing in a traditional Eastern Eastern part of the world. It hits a little different culturally. You know, you're multilingual. You know, language is the carrier of culture. So we have to start there. If we're going to change education meaningfully in a way that sticks and in a way that's authentic and real, we have to start with culture. And I'm a big believer in the power of culture. Now, there's 100 different ways to ask students questions. You can just start with that, and whatever community that you're in or whatever topic that you're teaching them, the questions are going to be different. They can be geared differently. They can be compound questions. They can call for different types of answers as appropriate in order to help them learn. The assumption with the Western, the classical approach, which probably comes from Socrates, although there are some pre-Socratic philosophers that maybe we'll talk about here in a little bit that did some very important work as well with regard to education. But the assumption here is that the truth is already inside you as a student. You just don't know it. You need the right questions, which are like environmental cues, to bring them out of you. And the reason for that is truth is eternal. In fact, I just mentioned the pre-Socratics, but one of them, Xenophanes, said, it's a great quote, it's one of my favorite quotes. He said, no one will ever know the truth, perfect truth. You'll never know it. And even if you utter the perfect truth, you won't know that you just uttered it. It's kind of in another realm, timeless, but we can draw from it. And I think Socrates uses that with the forms, you know, the world of forms, the essence. We all know what a perfect circle is, but none of us have ever seen one if we analyze it closely enough, you know, that type of a thing. That's a very Western oriented classical way to deliver and share knowledge. It puts a dividing line between the knower and what is known, which is important in our culture, whereas in the Eastern cultures, you know, I'm talking about Occident, Orient here at this point. It's people and ideas are a bit more complicated. They're a bit more together, merged, if you will. And so starting there, starting with culture, I'm a believer in the power of it, and cultures evolve. There is something to be said for a revolution, but that would be artificial to culture change. Cultures evolve, they don't revolve. Evolve means, if you really unpack that word, that term, it means to unroll. To evolve means to unroll. Therefore, whatever the thing that's evolving becomes, it was already inside of it from the beginning. A seed becomes something different as the context around it evolves, and it's invisible for a long time, and then it grows. So in our modern universities here in the West, I think we need to get back to that approach. The students that are coming up, you know as well as I do, the new generations that are coming up have a lot of questions. They want to know, how is this relevant to me? They want to know, how can I use this? They want to know, what path should I take? I mean, it's endless questions, which is really the heart of learning in our Western world. And so I think education has gotten away from that and a little bit more toward, I'm not giving you, I'm not teaching you how to ask great questions. I'm giving you answers. And unfortunately, that's a culture clash with the Western model, the pure, traditional, authentic Western model of education, because when you receive an answer, you stop thinking, because now you have your final ending. When you receive a question, that's when you start thinking. And so I think education runs on questions. And if we're strategic about those questions, we can make the most relevant, rigorous, interesting learning outcomes imaginable that can add positive value here in our modern current world that we live in. and can even solve a lot of the challenges that we're facing right now. But it, to the degree that it involves what you might call revolution, which I think it's more evolution than revolution, that's more superficial. It just means we maybe need to redesign structures, departments, um, different types of programs that are available, and the way we execute needs to change. But at its core, I think there's some basic cultural values around the power of education that we have lost a little bit. The liberal arts and historians and philosophers, they still got it probably more than anybody. They would be very much aligned with what I'm talking about right now. But in business education, where I work, I think we have an opportunity to focus more on authentic value added education rather than there's a lot of metrics and performance measurement and things like that in the research and in the teaching that has kind of made us lose the way a little bit, and we need to get back on track. And as we get back on track, I believe enrollments, fundraising, I mean, anything that's really important to the health of a academic program or a university will come back and be stronger than ever.
Right. It feels to me that, again, one of the ideas you mentioned at the very beginning was the fact that currently essentially everyone has the access to all kind of information, right? You can even listen lectures, I don't know, from Stanford, MIT. It doesn't really matter. You can get the access to the information. And it seems to me that what we are lacking is not the information by itself, but rather practical aspect of implementation that information. I'm talking about, I don't know, medieval craftsmanship guilds, when this is not about the knowledge or wording in a way by itself. It's about true knowledge with the core of the idea that the next generation of the craftsmen are supposed to be better, supposed to add and not just essentially, yes, evolve, not just repeat exactly what has been told to them, right? Their job was to go along with the requirements and expectations of the, well, market in a way, right? At that point of a time. But having that in mind, I would argue that Christianity, especially when we were talking about the Western part of the education and approach, has a lot to do, yes, the especially Europe went back and forth to the ancient Greek ideas, to the Roman Empire. They were discovering and rediscovering well-known ideas over and over again. But when we're talking about the New World, and by New World I mean United States of America, right? Everybody was brought the best and the worst with them to this new, bright new world, right? And I agree with you that most probably this way, especially educational way, cannot be a revolution by itself. It's always going to follow the events in the history. It's going to follow industrial revolution, in our case maybe digital or AI revolution. We keep hearing about that a lot. But I tend to believe that one way or another, we will be forced to revisit the system in overall. And I tend to believe that there is no other way than to revisit the system again from the very base ground. And in our case, most probably that's going to be, I don't know, kindergartens, right? What we're what knowledge we are providing to our kids, because I tend to agree here with you that we are still teaching our kids how to, I don't know, digest the information, not how to find the information and analyze it and use the power of critical thinking, especially nowadays when we are overwhelmed with the information, let's say at least different quality of this information, right? And at times it might be very hard to distinct the information, to do fact checks of everything, right? If the background, the idea aren't there. So, if you're okay with that, I'm inviting you to think together about how the system in overall might be changed. Because, as I mentioned before, when we were talking a little bit before I had the record button, right? There won't be at any moment of a time, most probably the case that young people will just appear at your door, no matter what kind of the higher education institution we're talking about, right? They're already fulfilled with some ideas, community knowledge, cultural aspects, their expectations the society has toward them. And with all of this, they're entering your door. So I would imagine that if we want to change the system, we really need to start from the very beginning. So how that might look like.
I think the way that you affect change in that way is it's a quality argument. Um, Take my program, for example. Students come to my program because they know they can't get the quality of educational product from anywhere else. We we have an experience, we have lectures, we do, like I mentioned earlier, very avant-garde kinds of things. For example, we don't use textbooks. We don't have PowerPoint slides with bullet points on them. Everything we display in a lecture is visual and nonlinear, and the knowledge comes directly from the research journals, not via textbooks, which the only purpose of a textbook is to summarize and describe what is actually in the research journals. We take the textbook out, we take the linear text-based presentation of information, and the worst thing is when a professor will just read a slide to an audience. It's not teaching. And so, again, we're talking about the need to evolve, and that worked for a long time. But if we're going to change, in my view, these are the things that need to change. So when students go through our program, they know that they can't get that anywhere else. What we offer has to be so much better than what else is available out there from other educational providers that they are attracted to us. And then as we do that, because not everybody's doing this, we share, we coordinate with other educators, and this is what I call recalibrating the gauge to really help the field of education. I think that's the way to change it. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it must be a bottom-up process, not a top-down process. I might have to teach it, a semester is 15 or 16 weeks long, and that's a long time. I may have to do that once and then have summer break and then do it again in the fall, and then people start talking about it and they remember what it was like. So we're talking about change over the course of years. But again, that's the way to do it. And then as you do that, in universities like where I work, we hear from like high school principals and high school teachers many times because they're thinking about where their students are going to go. And if a lot of their students are interested in entrepreneurship, for example, which is the program I lead, they'll talk to us and then they'll learn about how we do what we do. And then the question will become, well, how can we be teaching them and what can we be teaching them to prepare them to succeed in your program? Or if they don't want to go to university, to succeed if they go that route. And then we just have a conversation. But that invariably leads to coordination, better coordination along the supply chain, if you will, of people moving through the system. And then the system overall gets better because now it's more coordinated. When a system is not coordinated, that's when it will begin to fail or perform poorly. And so I think it starts with quality. And by quality, I don't mean better, middle, or worse. I mean qualitatively different. to appreciate the quality of something means it's categorically different from something else that might be traditionally associated with it. And so starting there and then using that difference, um, which needs to be excellent. You can't just do something different and then it not be excellent. It needs to be excellent, and then that will attract people to it, and then they can design their or redesign their programs in relation to it. So when I think about systemic change in the educational system, I think it looks a lot like that. Um, and I think, like I mentioned earlier, listening more to the students. We don't do enough of that, and it's very much part of the way we teach in the Western world, which is listening to students ask questions and then answering them and giving them questions back. There's a lot more exchange between teachers and students, and I think as we get back to that, the students will show us the way. And this is, I'll stop here, but these are Enlightenment principles, really. I mean, this is like Enlightenment philosophy in the Middle Ages and whatnot, and again in the Western world. I distinguish a lot between the East and the West because I lived in China in the 90s, and I know the Mandarin language and I understand that culture well. So this is why I refer to it multiple times like this. But yeah, to me it's a renaissance. Maybe not just evolution, not just revolution, but a renaissance. I guess we could think of it that way.
Let's for a second think about ROI. I'm still engineer at my core, as you just mentioned that you lived in China and therefore you do know this culture. I do understand the culture of numbers, and to show to the world that you are different while still being excellent, you really need to show that impact, right? And preferably in some kind of a numerical data. So when we're talking about ROI, how do you measure the impact of your specific program? Because again, getting back to my original question about the decline in even the applications being signed for the MBA or anything related to the entrepreneurship programs, that was majorly about, again, cost efficiency. If 20 years ago I would take the incredibly huge student loan to pay for my MBA program, I knew that I will be able not only to pay it back, but also to build successful career over time. And now there is quite a great chance that I will just be left alone with my student loan, and that's it. And there are tons of reasons for that, starting from the inflation and like national inflation and the national debt, which is continued to raise every day essentially. But also it is the fact that market by itself, the free market, is showing clearly that there is no value, right, for this specific knowledge. So I would imagine how many years you were into these specific programs, for me to understand whether there was enough time spent to see the first value results and first reaction of the market.
I think when we talk about ROI, this is a very traditional economic, if you will, indicator, return on investment. I think the principle of it is, it's essentially risk and reward, right? Which is old as time itself. So it's relevant, but I think we need to recalibrate the way we think about this a little bit in order to improve higher education. And that starts with you start with the end in mind. How are we denominating value here? What is the outcome that we're counting? What is the datum? What is the score that we're looking at? If it's purely economic, uh, dollars or whatnot, okay, that makes sense. And you can correlate that with other scores on the front end that you put into the equation. I tend to expand on that quite a bit. There are other types of scores we can count, measure, and prove, and we can relate them to the educational experience that one gets in a university. Oftentimes they are social in nature. You can look at social impact, for instance, at a community level. You can look at it at a family level. You can look at it at an individual level. One of the things that's, I mean, it's just a fact. People, for example, people with bachelor's degrees find it a lot easier to get loans, not student loans. I'm talking about if you need a small business loan or something like that. Um, and, you know, successful loans, for instance, is something that one can count. And if that comes as a result of education, that's good. Another thing that correlates well with education is like things related to family and life and community. Folks that have a stronger education, they recognize the value of communities, families. They crime rates are lower. They correlate negatively with education. Like all of these things that are measurable, we need to do a better job collecting those scores and relating them to what we're talking about. If we're authentically and accurately going to talk about the ROI of higher education, all of these things matter. If we take a pure economic approach and look at loans and student loans, yeah, that's a problem. I agree with you. But that's a problem that we can control on the front end when people are coming in. I think more upfront transparency and making, you know, perhaps loans or the terms of the loans part of the overall experience on the front end, and then being creative with regard to how they're paid back and different things like that. There's a lot of good work that can be done there. And again, for me, entrepreneurship is the key. I've had thousands of entrepreneurs, former students, current students, literally thousands. So pretty much any problem we think of, I can usually think of a past student that's doing something in relation to it. And you mentioned the student loans. There's one creative. It's a former student of mine in the city of Chicago, and they were on Shark Tank twice, the big national TV show, and they essentially have an app in which they do a deal with your bank if you have student loans, and then they link your purchasing card or your debit card to their app, which is coordinated with the bank, and it's the power of passive savings. And it's, you know, every time you buy something, you round it up by $5 or $1 or something like that. And passively, the extra markup goes into like escrow effectively over time. And then when it hits 500 or 1,000, it triggers a payment, and it's passively done, which is cool. But they also renegotiate your interest rate with the bank. So if you join their program, you get a lower interest rate with your bank. Now, it's not perfect, but it's helped a lot of people pay down their loans much quicker, much more quickly than they would have expected. But that's the entrepreneurial mindset. You take a problem and you view it as a question. You don't, you know, think of a problem as the answer, which means, oh, there's a problem there, it must not be good. No, you're curious about it and you engage it and you turn that problem into an opportunity. And so for me, ROI, certainly we need to reimagine how we denominate scores and then relate those data to the quality of life in civilized society, and for people and for families and for communities. But then we also need to look at the problems with a proper entrepreneurial mindset, a strong entrepreneurial mindset, and fix them and work on them. And, you know, you'll try to fix them and you'll fail. Maybe 9 times out of 10, you'll fail. But if a lot of people have the mindset, this is the great asymmetry of human development and existence. This is how we move forward. So again, I tend to view things through an entrepreneurial lens, and it's not naive. I've seen it done many times. So when I think about the problems in higher education right now, I think entrepreneurship is a big part of the solution to those problems.
Yeah, I guess so too. Maybe I wasn't quite right or correct when I was asking about the ROI. Just to unfold that question a little bit, when I'm talking about ROI, aka return on investments, I'm not by investments. I'm not solely thinking about money by itself. Loans is only one part of it, but much more important investment, which we are living at the universities, is the time of our life. We could spend 1, 2, 3, 4, God forbid, 5 years learning something we won't need in our life at all. And those 5 years are the years when our brains are at their top. We are top productive, we are top, um, essentially entrepreneurial. That's the moment, right? And we do not need absolutely to wait until we're going to hit the mark of 35, 45, right, to start think about our own ventures or anything like that. Fail fast approach is much more, I'd say, well, feels natural when you were 20. Right? And I do remember I've seen once this mug with the like essentially for the best entrepreneur, and that was like being crazy is not necessarily, but might quite be helpful. So and you feel that you're fine of being crazy when you were 20, right? But when you were again 35, being crazy is not exactly the mood you want to find yourself in, and that's maybe what I'm looking for when I'm talking about ROI, right? This feeling that you're investing your life in something really fulfilled with the meaning and future impact or value.
If you're a student and you're in university and you're not having a great time, I think you should leave. It's incumbent upon the university to deliver an experience and to create a place where you love it, because of the networking with other students and with external people who come in, because of the extracurricular programming and the social aspects, and also because of what you learn in the classroom. It ought to be fun. And therefore, the time spent there is truly an investment of time, in the sense that that investment of time will yield a better quality of life or higher quality time for decades to come. It should pay dividends for years to come. Again, just speaking out of the truth of my own experience, we have a beautiful new business school building at my where I work, and students will hang out in the lobby all day by choice, even if they don't have classes, and they sit at tables with others. And, people walk through. We're an urban school, so it's more open to the community, and different folks and visitors and guests will come in. A lot of collisions and conversations happen there that have yielded sometimes life-changing uh, new projects or gigs or potential job opportunities and different things like that. But they can't get that kind of networking anywhere else, really, with all of those elements. So I think a university in today's world has a duty to deliver an experience, not just an education, but also an experience that you can't get anywhere else. And when students leave, oftentimes they don't want to leave. They were so happy there that they just want to come back, or they wish they could stay longer. I don't encourage that personally. They have to get out of the nest and go do cool things, I believe. But that happens a lot. And so I don't think there's any reason, any good reason why a university today shouldn't be able to create an amazing space and experience, social space, physical space, uh, culture of learning and growth and development that inspires, and students should enjoy that. So time spent in a context like that is time well spent, and not like 4 years that you could have been out making money doing something else. It's 4 years you didn't spend making money doing something else, but because you spent it doing what you did, the 50 years to come, you're going to make more money or do better than you would have done had you not done that. It's interesting. I have a lot of these conversations with parents and people who are considering coming back to university, and we have we have some students in our undergraduate program who are almost my age who came back because of the way we deliver the education. And they've already, some of them have sold their businesses or they've done well and they wanted to come back because they respect what a good education can do for them. And they're unique. That's a new thing. I didn't always get that in the past. And then another category of student we get, which is completely blowing my mind, are these young entrepreneurial, aspiring entrepreneurs who launch projects while they're in their sophomore year. And because of the way we deliver education, if you launch a business in my program, you can make that business part of your class. We can do an independent study on it. We can even hire other students to work on it with you. And we've had some incredible success stories. We have one, he's 23 now. He graduated last year. He runs a $12 million business, and he has hired multiple people out of our program into really good jobs working with him. And then we have another one from a couple years ago that runs another seven-figure business, and he's also hired, and they went through and they graduated. So we're getting more and more of these kinds of students coming through, and that's exciting to me. But Yaryna, if I ever do get one student in there and they're like, my business is really taking off, why am I even here? I'll be the first one to tell them, you know what, if there's a clash between your education and your business, we'll try to find harmony between the two. But if we can't, I think you should leave. You should go and you should launch that. But these are rare cases, Zuckerberg dropping out of Harvard, Michael Dell, there are cases of people dropping out and not finishing. But that's why. It's because the business is so big and taking off so fast that it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Well, yeah, and I would imagine that they've learned a lot along the way.
For
I
sure.
mean, being an entrepreneur by itself, it's quite a journey to say at least. And I know that for a fact from my own experience. To be totally honest with you, I thought that 10 years more than that of experience working in a big, sometimes huge projects give me enough knowledge and experience to build my own company. And within the first year of being an entrepreneur, I figured that I have known nothing, literally zero. And I'm absolutely happy that I've discovered that because I tend to believe that I'm lucky enough that I haven't lost that childhood curiosity and happiness to learn new things. And I absolutely love the idea you shared that if the book isn't interesting enough, do not feel sad or bad to close it.
Right.
Just let it be and move forward. That's it. And I was trying to find some statistic, and that was a little bit weird to me, to be totally honest with you, that I couldn't find any specific details or correlation between the quality of education. And I'm not talking about just grades, right? Bachelor or amount of PhDs or something like that, because in my opinion, the grade by itself is like the currency by itself. If you do not know the specific value, consumer power behind of it, those are just numbers. Same applies to the amount of specific grades. Well, we have, I don't know, 100 of professors. Okay, still you haven't shared nothing with me. But the quality of education, that's what I was looking for. So the correlation between the quality of education and microeconomical stats, because I'm pretty sure that there is quite a good correlation between of that. And the main reason why I was looking for this specific data was, or one of the reasons, was the book Why Nation Falls. And one of the ideas highlighted in this book is essentially that behind the wealth and prosperity of nations not necessarily lays geographical or any other aspects rather than cultural, politics, and the power of education, therefore. And because the education is so great, brilliant people creating more value to drive their markets, to drive their communities, to drive their culture. And therefore, that means that they have the better way to analyze everything. Because as human beings, right, we tend to save our energy. And by that, I mean we tend to take into account the very last amount of memory or the most bright moments we have in our memory and start to analyze everything solely based on that information because it is so essentially inexpensive from the perspective of our body to do rather than trying to analyze and go deep and spend sleepless nights circling around problem. But yet again, we're touching the entrepreneurial idea of falling in love with the problem and trying to solve it. So essentially what I'm looking here is maybe you do have any kind of information regarding how specifically the better education might have impact in the overall growth of the nation and prosperity of the nation.
Well, it's challenging from an empirical perspective to do research on that because a lot of the outcome variables that we're talking about are, especially with entrepreneurship, a lot of these outcome variables are part of the informal economy and they don't show up on the economics radar, so to speak. They're very internal, private transactions or projects or decisions that are made, different things like that. I have ad hoc examples. I can describe qualitative examples of lives that have been changed because of education. Absolutely. They're unimpeachable. But to take a general approach and find an essential trend using those kind of data, I don't even know if there's a good datum to use about that because every case is so different, other than the fact that they're human beings trying to make a better life for themselves. But it happens. It the way you framed it reminds me of how we teach and traditionally how we teach and how we're starting to teach more in these very progressive programs with the advent of technology and Gen Z. You talked about um, picking out critical incidents, right? We don't remember every event that happened, but we remember signature events or important events that occurred, and that colors our memory and our therefore explanation of the past. That's it's human error. It's the limits of information processing for sure. But I think with some of the new approaches in the technological realm, like whether it's a huge model, a large language model, or another type of, we'll call it a population of cases. Traditionally, we have not been able to look at a whole population when we're trying to explain things that are happening in that population. Therefore, we have to use statistics and we have to draw a sample from that population, and then we infer what may be going on in the larger population. We're not observing it directly. We infer what's happening in the population based on the sample, which may be much smaller than the population. But we make a conclusion based on the sample alone. That's changing, and it's going to change within the next probably 10 or 20 years because now the way that the technology is set up, we can often grab a whole population. And if we can grab a whole population and look at trends within it, the need for sampling for inferential or general linear model-based statistics to take a sample, we don't have to do that anymore. And when you do draw a sample from a population, there are these parameters that it must meet in terms of normal distribution and outliers and the heteroscedasticity and the variance and all of that. And if the sample violates those assumptions, then it's probably not a good reflection of the population. All that goes out the window if we can capture a whole population. And with technology, especially with technology converging with the social realm, there's enormous amounts of data out there by which we can take a non-parametric statistical approach to make sense out of things. And in so doing, we as humans, the users of the technology, can tap into information, whether it be, like recorded conversations or GPS data for geographic positioning over periods of months or years or even longer. And that empowers humanity. I don't view that as a threat to humanity and our information processing limits. I view it as an advantage because as great as those systems are, they still can ask true out-of-the-box questions. They provide answers and we ask them questions, but they're not coming up with the kinds of questions that can reframe, or as I call it, recalibrate the gauge. So I think as technology, the advent of these kinds of technologies continues to unfold, we will be able to do things we weren't able to do before. But in order to do those things, we will have to have a stronger entrepreneurial mindset, which is driven by curiosity and asking questions and doing unique kinds of things. And then new vistas and new possibilities can open up to us. It sounds very fanciful and theoretical, but the truth of the matter is, in any economy, ours included, 80% of the jobs come from the entrepreneurial sector. 4 out of 5 jobs are with entrepreneurial firms. But those firms that are hiring, those entrepreneurial firms, when they hire somebody, they can't afford to, or they don't want to wait 6 months for that new hire to get up to speed. They want them to be able to add value right away. And a great, back to the power of education, I don't believe short workshops or even mentoring, for that matter, is really enough to prepare somebody for that. I think a powerful, transformative university education can create a mindset in a learner that will help them take those jobs and then thrive in those jobs. And then, of course, the fourth part of that is I'm training entrepreneurs, right? So most of them aren't ready to be entrepreneurs while they're in my program. It's only about 5 out of 100, 1 out of 20. But the ones who go and work for those entrepreneurs, like I mentioned, that's a great stepping stone to becoming an entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs I know worked with or for another entrepreneur before they branched out on their own. And so when, from a systems thinking perspective, like we were talking about, when one views those elements, those 4 elements together as a system, then they see the role that a university is playing, particularly an urban university with a strong outreach orientation like the one that I work at. We reflect it in terms of how we measure impact, but we also reflect it in terms of how we deliver education. So we like to say in my program that theory without practice is pointless, but practice without theory is blind. And I think that's a kind of a spin off of I think Kurt Lewin or some scientist came up with that. But essentially you need 50-50, 50% theory, 50% practice. So in an urban school, you can put students into teams and work with entrepreneurs very easily because there's a lot of entrepreneurs in your local ecosystem that are showing up to work with you. And when the students learn fascinating theories in class, and then they work together to apply a model to a real entrepreneurial venture, that's when they learn how the theory really works. And we also talk a lot about knowledge and wisdom. the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And you actually alluded to it a little bit earlier when you were talking about in the lead up to this question. It reminded me of that. Knowledge is text. You read a textbook, you learn a book, whatever, learn a model, learn a framework, learn a program. You've got some knowledge right there. That's cool. But it's not until you really that's text. It's not until you put it into context. Context is wisdom. And text without context is fundamentalism. It's dangerous. It's naive. You need that wisdom of context to put the text into something that would make sense. It's like, a lot of people know that a tomato is a fruit. That's knowledge, I guess. But at least in the Western hemisphere, knowing not to put a tomato in a fruit salad is wisdom. And you learn that through experience, but someone without that context would just say, but it's a fruit. Of course we can put it in there, but that's knowledge. That's fundamentalism. That's it. So I think a great university should be good at delivering that sort of understanding to a learner, so they come out and they can do more faster, and maybe they can make up for the 4 years that they spent in university.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense to me. You've reminded me of this. I did not even know how to put that properly. That's not a model. That's not a knowledge. In my case, that's a story about the Eastern approach to learn things, that it contains 3 stages: shu, ga, and ri. Right? When the shu is just continue repeating after me in a nutshell, right? And guy is like try to do it yourself, and ri, you are the master, and now you know how to improvise. You can create your own techniques and ideas, and you would never know how this idea came up into your mind. It just popped it, right? You just found
Right.
it there. So it feels like essentially what you were trying to do, at least from my understanding, is to help folks to pass through the first 2 stages rather than just the first one. Repeat after me exactly how I'm showing to you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So,
we call that ready, fire, aim. Not ready, aim, fire. Ready, fire, aim. We we get the students ready, and they start to take action while they're in our program, but it's important that they take action before they really understand completely how the action should work. I think it's a mistake now. Maybe it wasn't 50 years ago, but now I think it's a mistake to take a ready, aim, fire approach to education, to plan everything out and then expect the action to occur according to plan. And the reason for that is because the world changes in different ways than it changed before. With the information technology and the way that we share information, change is a little bit more dynamic. Maybe it's an artifact. Maybe change has always been so dynamic, but we're certainly more aware of the changing in the environment now. And so no matter how well you plan, the action is never going to be correct. There's always going to be some error embedded in it. And you need that error. That's why you take action, and then it's going to be half wrong or whatever, and then you correct the error going forward, which generates the feedback loop, which is important for evolution, which again means to unroll. And yeah, we take that very seriously. It's trial and error, ready, fire, aim. That's just the way we like to think about learning and entrepreneurship.
I would imagine that you're absolutely right in assuming that this need of change is very recent. And the reason why I'm thinking about that, and maybe you will find it funny, because of the word emergent, right? We've essentially just added the emergent solution, emergent AI modeling, and this concept when 1 plus 1 sometimes can be less or more than 2, sometimes can be absolutely unexpected, the result of this equation, right? And we've just started to realize that as the society in overall, I don't know for how long, 20 maybe years, most probably less than that. And that's why I tend to agree here with you that most probably this is the recent request in overall from the society, culture, and the market follows all of these requests, right? It not necessarily always dictate the weather. Are you planning to add any kind of the collaboration with the maybe middle school um, pupils
We
or
can we coordinate with them.
high school?
Yeah, we coordinate with them. We're putting together a kind of summer program for high school students. We did one at my previous institution, and it was good because they're thinking about their future, and it's cool for them to be able to come to a university and do something. So we've been playing around with these kinds of ideas. We haven't done it yet, but we're planning on doing it. And then the way that we do it here, Yaryna, is we take community extremely seriously. So when we learn and when we perform and when we do things in our program, everybody's part of it. So that includes students. And so the external community members outside of the university walls, there's one junior college system right now who approached me about helping them with their curriculum development as it relates to entrepreneurship. So because we're an outreach-based program, we put students into teams, and we have some of our students doing a consulting project with that entrepreneurship program in that junior college. So they're designing the curriculum and they're creating some marketing materials, which is, great for us because it's how we measure performance in terms of that kind of impact. Great for the students. They're getting experience they can put on their LinkedIn and put on their resume and use to get jobs. And then it's great for the partner because we're really good at delivering entrepreneurship education. For them, it's new. Um, we've won national awards. We were the top emerging program a few years ago in the country. They haven't really done anything yet, so we have a lot to share and give and do that, and that aligns with our mission. So we I think some more extracurricular, like outside of our degree bearing courses, I think there'll be some more programming related to that in the years to come, but we're not quite there yet, but I think we will be before long.
Well, there you have it, top emergent programs.
Yeah, exactly.
So, to wrap those questions and unfold yet another very complex topic, all these entrepreneurs, you're spending a lot of time, you're giving them a lot of passion, and I would imagine that each and every one of them are so important to you, they're gonna came into the market, which currently dictates, or at least this is the very least vibe on the market, the merit-based approach. And as I mentioned before we kind of hit the record button, I tend to believe that this is quite a good idea on a surface. My problem or my beef with this idea is solely the fact that I still did not understand how exactly it's going to be executed, how exactly it's going to work for everybody. Because the free market, at least maybe in my a little bit naive point of view, is merit based by itself. The free market will make a choice by, people will vote with their faith, with their money, you name it. But when we are talking about some kind of a grants, and most probably a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs will try to secure grants as the first uh, type of funding for their businesses, or some kind of a contracts, the first, I don't know, you name it, private sector contract or government contract, it doesn't really matter. Everything connected to those spheres currently feels like going to be connected to the merit based approach. And I'm trying to unfold this question and I'm asking this specific question to all of my guests. How are you imagining the execution of the merit-based approach in the current market and like political and economical situation? Because that's
I'm
important, put it
imagining
in the
it.
context.
Sure. I'm imagining it. It's going to work, in my opinion, if we get really serious about thinking globally but acting locally. And it's harder than it sounds
It
to
sounds
to think
complex
globally.
enough.
To think globally means to bring in ideas and knowledge from outside your current context. To act locally means to denominate value in terms of your local environment, not to worry too much about national level, international level, or whatnot. I mean, if you get a breakout performance that makes national level impact or is excellent at the level outside your current local community, that's great. But that shouldn't be the goal. That should be an unexpected but positive consequence of your excellent work. Action should be geared, and the evaluation of action and performance and impact should be geared locally. Local cities, local states, local communities, local families, demographic categories, all faith-based communities, all of it. It's really important, and we tend not to do that in part because with information technology and the spread of information, it's so easy to compare across contexts, compare performance across contexts. Are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yes, 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 I'm here. No worries.
Okay, good, good, good. Okay, just making sure we have the connection. We we compare across contexts all the time, and that's good to learn from, but to let that comparison reflect back on your own performance is a slippery slope. It's a little bit dangerous to do that because you will begin to believe that, let's say if you're trying to, I don't know, run a restaurant, or let's say you're trying to cut hair, let's say you're trying to sell clothing, let's say you're trying to put security for communities, or educate people, or fight crime, whatever it may be.
Hmm.
There's crime in every city, there's crime in every state, but the nature of the crime varies from place to place, and the way in which you should engage that problem changes from place to place. The action must change. And so, even though you draw conceptually in your thinking, you draw from far away, what you do, not thinking, but I'm talking about action now, what you do needs to be geared for local relevance. Think global, act local. And there's more than one way to get this wrong. One way to get it wrong is to think global but act global. And a lot of large, we'll call them cosmopolitan environments, are like this. And the error in acting globally is gentrification and squeezing people out, and inflation and these kinds of things. But then there are other communities in which they're very good at acting local, which is good, but they think local, which is bad. Because when you think local, it drives other types of tendencies, such as uh, being suspicious of outsiders, or internal dynamics not related to merit but related to class membership, and different things like that, and other kinds of substitutes for thought, which are damaging to a civilized society if you think local. Thinking global at the societal or the community level is it's actually easier to cultivate than trying to get people to act local. And let me unpack that and talk about it a little bit. Even if you're in a small town, and you don't have a great perspective on what's going on in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, you can still think globally. Because to think globally, there's more than one way to do it. The first way is to be in one place, but to look at other places. So in other words, let me rephrase that so it's really clear. You can be in one moment in time, but look at multiple places. Okay, that's like if we right now were building a business and we would look at what people building similar businesses are doing in other places, in other countries. We are here sharing time. We're looking at other spaces and places. That's the first way. The second way to think globally is not to do that, but to be right where you are, but to be in one place, but to think in terms of multiple time environments. So that means to study history, to look at the historic and the cultural development of the place where you are, because you are not there anymore. That place has changed, and you can learn a lot from that. It can really expand your perspective. And we mentioned Enlightenment philosophy earlier. Probably the greatest Enlightenment philosopher, he's a textbook example of that. Immanuel Kant, who lived in Königsberg, Prussia, in the I guess the 1700s. He never went more than 50 miles away from his hometown ever in his life. But his thinking, the global power of it, informed hundreds of thousands of serious thinkers all around the world who've never been to Königsberg, Prussia. So he was a global thinker, even though he's a small town guy. And so global thinking is, there are ways to do it. For a community, you can encourage that. And I would add, it's maybe opposite from a person. I think it's hard to change the way a person thinks, harder, but it's actually easier to change the way a community thinks. You can introduce these new ideas and perspectives, and people will share them with each other, and it kind of has an effect on the life of thought in that community. Um, that's my experience anyway as an ecosystem builder. Now, on the action side of the equation, it's important to act local, for reasons that I described, and it's important not to act global for reasons I described. But it's hard to get a community to shift on that side of things. If they act globally, it's hard to get them to act local, and vice versa. And the reason for that is because action at the macro level or the community level is oftentimes locked into structural inertial forces, contracts, arrangements, physical layout of the way things are done and the way things have been structured and built to transact business and take action. They have a structural component, which is hard to shift. But with a human being, I think it's still not easy all the time, but it's relatively easier to change the way they behave, especially if they're younger and something like that, or they're working in a particular environment. So it's very interesting. I mean, if the challenge is to think global but act local for those reasons, we can make two kinds of error. We can think local, which is wrong, or we can act global, which is wrong. And then it's also interesting because to change the ontological status of a person or a community in relation to this principle, I think it's easier for the thinking change for a community, but harder for a person. And I think it's harder for the action change for a community, but easier for a person. So it's a very rich topic. And you asked me about how the merit-based approach can work, or what do I expect how it will work or how it will not work. If we think global but act local, it has to work, because now you may have people who are disadvantaged and they don't even know it in a particular community, but it doesn't matter because performance has been geared for local relevance. That means relevant to them, not with respect to other people elsewhere who may have different comparative advantages, to use your Wealth of Nations metaphor, Adam Smith. So for me, think global, act local is vital to what we're talking about here. It's vital in our program. We do it every day. The way that we measure impact is local, but our thought is global all the time as much as possible.
Yeah, but let me challenge you a little bit here, because it seems to me that the request of thinking global, especially with the context you provided, there is essentially two ways, two main ways, or maybe a third one combining the first two. It is or going wider or going deeper, essentially. Requires a lot of resources, especially from the community. And by resources, first of all, I mean willing to spend time. And also, it requires willing to be okay or curious enough to admit the fact that maybe your ideas are not necessarily the best one or the only correct one. Because when we're forcing ourselves going wider or deeper, that means that we are initially creating this space for new ideas and we are ready to accept them with the gratitude or at least curiosity.
I think that applies to individuals. I think it is harder with respect to individuals, but when you get to larger groups of individuals, there's a lot of diversity there. And so the way that this person may handle that challenge that you just articulated will be different from the way another person will handle that challenge. And if these two people are talking to each other, they learn from each other, and the community elevates as a result. It's
So, like
it's
wisdom of a
old,
crowd, something like that.
yeah, something like that, something like that. It's an old, this notion of thinking globally, and even in a small town like with Immanuel Kant or whomever, it's passed down through folkways and storytelling and families and generational um, knowledge, I guess you could say. There are ways in which it comes down, and respecting that history is, I believe, U.S. is a young country, so we don't, our relative historical imagination is shorter than some other places that have longer histories. But there's a reason why that stuff, that historical knowledge, is respected and revered in these older societies, because they know that it expands your thinking. And if you think you're facing hard times, I mean, you're going to be better prepared to devise a solution to making them easier times if you're aware of how previous folks who came before have engaged, maybe not exactly the same, but similar types of times, similar types of problems.
Getting back to the think global, act local. Regarding act local, and especially when we were talking about acting from the perspective of love and paying respect to the history of local community, to the history of building and everything what happened to the community, in most of the cases that might create a lot of silence for the newcomers to the community, or even newcomers to the, I don't know, new generation even of the entrepreneurs, simply because we do have the history, we know exactly how to do stuff, and we do not need any newcomers. And that might create a lot of borders, issues, and silos.
Yes, to me, that is local thinking. Like global thinking, the mindset is more open to outsiders coming in. And then what the outsiders do is action. And as long as the action is um, important to or positively contributing to that local community, then it's no problem. Even though they're outsiders, the thinking is open to welcoming them, but then the action is defined such that performance can be denominated in terms of whether or not it's good for the community. And so, yeah, that would be thinking global and acting local. I think if we're going to take a merit based approach, I think this principle is very important to that.
So by acting local, how tiny or decomposed of local are we talking about? State level, city level, county level?
It can be all of those, depending on the program in question. So if you're the leader of a state, let's say, that's your locality, the state. If you're leading a city, you have to calibrate your perspective for that particular locale. And then same thing for an organization or a department or a team or maybe even a family. I think there's great latitude to define or redefine the boundaries of what is local around a market, around a geographic community, around a demographic community. All of it can apply. Um, and I think that's why um, a lot of people don't think about it, because these are traditional boundaries that we don't always think about all the time, but we act in terms of those boundaries frequently and we're not even aware of it. But I think more of a self-awareness of knowing, living the examined life, and just knowing where you are in terms of human existence. If you're a provider or a family member, or what you do for your community, just being self-aware of you and your impact, um, which again goes back to a great university education. I think that's part of what a university should deliver. And so this think global, act local mentality to me is what a university ought to be doing. And back to our original question, we're talking about like the power of a university education. I think this is a great example. This is what we ought to be doing. And it's not easy to do, but if you earn a PhD and you publish and you learn about how knowledge emerges and exists, and whether or not you can claim your knowledge is valid or not, and you understand epistemology, you should be able to design programs that have this kind of impact on learners. And that's what we try to do. And I'm inspired by a lot of my other colleagues in the field. They reach out to me and they want to learn, or they want to talk to me about how to teach and how to make an impact, because of all the challenges that are rolling out right now at a national level and across communities. And I'm optimistic. I think we've been through challenging times before, certainly in the country and certainly in education. But as long as we just keep our principles true, with regard to the power of education, and we remember where it came from, going all the way back to its philosophical foundations, I don't think we can fail. I think we will be just fine.
And you think that no matter how hard the economical environment might be, we still will be able to prevail and find our way?
I do, because the secret to that challenge to me is the power of community. That's another thing that education teaches you. It's how to scale and how to build, which means how to bring people together. And if you have a strong community, um, you can weather even periods of market failure. You can survive and provide mutual support, because the different individuals in that community are diverse and they bring different things to the table. And depending on whatever external challenge that emerges, someone in the community is going to know what the best thing to do about it is, and then they can share that with all the other people in the community. But if you're alone and you're not connected to something larger than yourself, like a community, it's harder. And that applies to every individual who's alone. So understanding the power of community and how to build a community and how to organize a community and how to evolve a community, to me, is a big part of the way forward. And it's certainly part of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurs have to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right from the perspective of the bright side of the community, but also the history have known the communities which brought the destructive power.
Mhm.
And getting back to what you just pointed about the current environment, I would say that the nation by itself is very polarized. And my fear is if we won't learn fast enough to brought a lot of logic rather than emotion into our conversations, we might find ourselves divided by communities, not connected. And the
Mm.
power of collaboration will just disappear. And especially when, or if we will try to close ourselves solely in our local communities or something like that without respect to the nation in overall, again, getting back to your idea of thinking global, right?
Mhm.
We may face with the so-called national divorce, and it scares me that I'm seeing more frequently this idea in different sources of information, because I tend to believe, well, from what I'm getting exactly as you do, that the power of collaboration and community which aims to build and to dream together might be incredible. But on the other hand, it might be absolutely incredibly and powerful destructive if
Mm.
we are, as any tool, right? If we are not using it properly. And I'm very interested in the role of educational institutes as the cultural beacons in a way,
Mm.
which might help the youth of the nation to find their way to connect, to collaborate, and to find their way to dream about stars once again.
Yes. Well, that's what we do, and that's what we should be doing for sure. It needs to be aspirational, like you said, to dream big. That's good, but it's a lot easier for an individual to think boldly and think big if they feel like they're part of something that's larger than themselves. And that could be a family or a community or a program or a culture or a faith-based institution or religious identity. All of those things can function as communities and have that effect. So I think the power of community is vital to avoiding the kinds of destructive errors that you're talking about. And education is vital to that because it drives communities, it helps create communities, it creates new communities, within your professional field and different things like that. So all of these things are very vital to the future because they bring people together. And when people are brought together, as long as they resist the trap or the urge of beginning to think local and think small and think provincially and to think inward looking, if they keep that global thinking, even as they perform and act locally, I don't think they can fail. I believe that can even weather market failure or institutional failure because the community can find ways to help itself in very entrepreneurial ways. And so, building culture and a strong, clear sense of your shared values that define your community are all very important to this, and communicating about them and communicating about your experiences with other people as you go through all of that reinforces community. And technology can help for sure. Like, for example, we in my program, we run our whole program on Discord. And so we have Discord private channels and servers and different things like that where we post a lot of information all the time, but it's only for members of our program. And we try hard to get to know everybody else in the community. And not because we want to change who they are, but we just want to know who they are. We want to preserve the diversity, but we want to bring diverse individuals together into one common cause or purpose. And that's actually, it's funny, that's where the term university came from. If you think about the modern university, the literal meaning of that word is one truth. That's what it means. And the implication of that is that even though it's one shared common truth, a diverse group of people endlessly diverse group of people can participate in that one truth. And I don't even know. I mean, I bet 25% of university professors today actually know what I just told you. But when I talk about using culture and history to empower what we're doing, they should all know what that word means, and they should all know the power and the importance of what that word means.
I tend to agree here with you. So, to wrap up our conversation, you mentioned that you tend to believe that our education will be changed in 15, maybe even 10 years. How it's going to look like?
Stronger embracement of diverse learning styles, number one. A greater range of modalities of education, including remote, but not exclusively remote, also including in person, also including partnerships with external professionals in the field that you're studying. Greater participation of those external partners in the evaluation of the learning. So we do that already in my program. When we work with the external entrepreneurs, at the end of the project, we receive a memo written by those external entrepreneurs articulating the value that the students' work added to their business. And their business is a real thing. The dollars and the deadlines are real. So if we have that kind of external validation of what the students have learned as evidenced through their work, the learning experience becomes geared for relevance. It's not like irrelevant stuff that you're learning in a book and then trying to memorize so you can repeat it on a test. It's actually learning a concept well enough to apply it in the context of something that matters, like a business right now. And so that is what I call this avant-garde approach to education. And I think we will see more of that. And as we do that practical activity, we need to be careful not to sell our soul, meaning we have to maintain the academic rigor. All of the research, all of the writing, all of the production of knowledge that one has to do in order to be a tenured professor in a university can't go away. They still have to be there. But the way all of that is made manifest with regard to the educational experience, it's going to involve these embracing diverse learners, different modalities of educational delivery, and very creative partnerships with people inside and outside the university environment.
So it feels to me like yet another example of thinking global and act local in a way.
Indeed.
So there you have it. Thank you so much for this conversation. It honestly feels to me that I could talk to you for many, many more hours because I really enjoy trying to unwrap a lot of stuff and things. And I'm truly curious about different points of view, different perspectives, maybe even at the very same question. But the fact how people sometimes are thinking, going from their perspectives, going from their history, growing from their culture, it's amazing.
That's wonderful. I appreciate that sentiment. It means a lot to me, and I enjoyed the conversation too. I think you have a powerful interviewing style, and I hadn't answered questions like that before, and that's a good thing. So thank you. That was a great conversation.